First question this week comes in from KM from Instagram. They say, "Hey, what's up, Adam? Thanks for all the great information on BonkBros and Matchbox. Love your content. I listen to you every day at work trying to get any insight I can on cycling. I race the Michigan Gravel Race Series. I do short races around 25 miles. Do you think that I should do more HIIT training or zone 2? Could you maybe talk a little bit about training for shorter or mini races on the podcast if you have time? Thanks, KM." So I wanted to throw this one in because I think it's an interesting question how he poses it. Saying that 25 miles is a short race, I think, is a relative term, because 25 miles, especially on a mountain bike race, I mean, that, you're talking traditional XC race, and to me, like, that's not necessarily short racing. So I wanted to address his question specific to what the demands are for him, but then also maybe we can take it in the more polarized end of things, where we're actually talking about something like short track racing or sub hour racing, because I think there is a little bit different approach when you're talking about really short races versus kind of this like this is still proper endurance racing, I think, 25 miles. But let's start with what do we think, if we were going to give some advice to Cam here. There's not a whole lot of context baked into the question, but kind of from what we can gather here, trying to understand, should I spend my focus more on targeting the higher end intensity training or zone 2 training?
It almost sounds like he is asking this because we've been talking a lot about those volume blocks the last month or two that Dylan's been talking about all that stuff. And so I almost feel like this is in a response to those, because in the context of volume blocks, every time we're talking about that, we're talking about these ultra distance races, like 100-mile plus gravel races and stuff like that.
Sure.
So
Yep.
maybe he's thinking is a volume block, does that even make sense? Or does doing a bunch of endurance volume benefit even a 25-mile gravel race? So maybe that's where it's coming from. That's what I'm thinking, maybe sparked the question.
Yeah. So I mean, sometimes when I imposed with a situation like this, or a question like this, I'll ask myself, okay, if I were to take one part out of the equation and just look at it from, okay, if I only had one input here, which one would I benefit most from? Or which one would I even think about, instead of benefiting from, which one would I be missing out if I didn't have either high intensity in training or a lot of volume zone 2 training? Which one would I feel the the detriments from more? And it's kind of tricky here, because again, I don't totally consider a 25-mile race to be short racing. You're definitely talking over an hour, so you're really getting into that true endurance realm of racing, because you're beyond what your body could sustain for an hour, so you're going longer than you would for thresholds. So, but that said, if you only did zone 2 training coming into a 25-mile race, I think you'd be on your back foot pretty quick, whereas if you were just structuring your week around let's say 3 1-hour HIIT sessions, you actually might fare a little bit better, because you'd have some of the top end responsiveness. Now we can all agree, though, that you kind of need the combination of the two. So what I would say is, for something like this kind of racing, where we're talking true XC racing, I think your foundation, when you're kind of structuring out, and this is actually how I structure my weeks, even for my athletes, doesn't matter what kind of plan they're on. I put the key workouts in the week first. So their intensity days, I put those in first, and then I put their recovery days in first. And then the rest of it, you kind of just are filling in with your base training, or zone 2 training. uh, and that's how I would approach this. I would lay out what you want and need to get from your high intensity training first, and then the rest is just filling in as much time as you can to bolster that with aerobic, conditioning and zone 2 training.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like a hour and a half cycling event is kind of like a middle distance track event. It's like an 800 or a 1500 where it's 50-50, 50% aerobic, 50% anaerobic. And if he's asking, because he only wants to train for a few months for this event, what should I focus on? It's really, I would say there's no magic equation. I think, the 2 intensity days, the rest of your days focused on building your aerobic base are just what you do, but it needs to be tailored to you. So it's one of those exploit your or train your weakness. So if, I don't know, if you're lacking, like you do a lot of high intensity stuff and you're lacking maybe the aerobic side of things, like you do need to add some volume to your long rides on the weekends. But again, there's so much we don't know about your current training.
For example, so like if to understand whether or not that would be the case, like let's say you feel really good for the first 45 minutes of the race, but then the last 45 minutes you just start fading and like feeling like you're bonking or whatever, maybe you're cramping or you just can't respond to the efforts, then likely you just need more aerobic base fitness. A lot of times people confuse that though and thinking, I just need more intensity. I need to stack more and more intensity so I can take on more and more intensity. But, you can only stack on so much intensity into an interval session. What you really need is like more just foundational fitness. So that would be, spending more time focused on trying to get more, zone 2 volume in.
There's this like old school understanding around training volume to where if you do, the more volume you do, it's going to blunt your ability to do high intensity. And to me, that seemed like an old school mentality, like, oh, well, do too much volume and I'm not going to be able to do high intensity. It was a very simple way of putting it. But in the last few years with all this.
Really quick, like if you have just almost doubled your volume, yeah, you're not going to be able to also do high intensity in that.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going, like now we're in this realm of like ultra distance and max volume, and we're talking about 30-40 hour weeks and of these volume blocks. And so I went through this like thinking process of like last year I was doing my volume was going up, but I was thinking, oh, I could still do some crits in the middle of the summer because now my overall fitness is going to be so much higher because of all the volume I've done. And I felt awful in those crits. And so then I went back to the drawing board and was like, okay, I'm not going to race crits anymore because I'm doing so much volume now and it's blunting my high intensity so much that I can't do crits like I used to be able to do crits if I want to do gravel racing like the way I want to do gravel racing. Sure. So I was like trying to straddle the fence and do both. And last summer, I really came to the conclusion of like, okay, I got to have a singular focus. Like, which way do I want to go? And so that's when I hung up and said, I didn't do a single cyclocross race this year, and I'm not going to do a single crit this year because that's just not what I'm training for. And I like to feel good for the races that I do. So doing a crit and not being able to race the crit like I used to when I wasn't doing so much volume wasn't as much fun. And what I learned from all of that is this old school thinking of volume will blunt your high intensity. Like there's some truth to that. I think.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where, so another thing too, with, shorter duration races, obviously there is definitely more demand placed on the higher intensity efforts. And thus in your training, there should be more emphasis placed on the quality of your high intensity interval training sessions. So
yeah,
what that means is like, you want to try and come into those high intensity sessions pretty fresh and feeling good. And with the intention of, I'm going to smash this workout. Like this is one of my key workouts. Whereas like if you're training high volume for long endurance gravel racing, or ultra endurance mountain bike racing, there's still emphasis placed on the intensity sessions, but like we're a lot of times stacking those intensity sessions onto high volume weeks or after a long endurance ride the day before, and
Oh
we,
yeah.
you know, there's kind of an expectation that you're not necessarily going to like blow your numbers out of the water. Like we're just trying to put time in zone, kind
Yeah.
of, you know, grind through it and, you know, get on to the next day. Whereas like when we're talking about doing intensity for shorter, you know, XC races or short track racing or cyclocross racing, like we want the like to where you're hitting like PRs. Like we want to see like some PRs
Yeah.
going. We want to see like real improvement where like you're hitting the top end of those zones. And the only way you can do that is by prioritizing those sessions in your week. And that means either putting them the day after a rest day. Sometimes that means a little bit longer warm up or some more strategic warm up to like get your body prepared to do the sharper efforts. You know, or maybe you're doing them after like a, you know, an easy endurance ride. But also that means like as you get closer to key events, or maybe once even you get into the race season, like I don't know how long the Michigan race series is here. They don't mention, you know, they just talk about, yeah, Michigan gravel race series being 25 miles. You know, once you get into that season, like let's just say maybe they're like it's an 8-week series or something like that, and it's every single week, you might need to drop your volume back for at least like a few weeks at a time so that you can stay fresh. Because if you're constantly doing higher volume throughout that, you're just not going to get as much out of yourself on that race day either.
Yeah. 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 The whole balance between freshness and fatigue. Like now that I'm training high volume, and I think that the difference between, like, the one word that pops out to me is durability. Like
Sure.
when you're a crit racer or a short race, you know, like this is less than 90 minutes, like durability isn't something I'm thinking out. That's like all I'm thinking about now. Is like, how can I be durable to where I'm can put out good power 4 hours, 5 hours plus into a race? And so really what that means is like now I'm thinking that when I go into workouts fatigued, that's actually a good thing, because now I'm like replicating what I need to increase durability. But that same thing for shorter races is actually bad. Like
The opposite.
I don't want to go into a workout fatigued. And so I think that's the big difference, is like, what are you training for? And then managing what level of fatigue you want to go into a workout with. Because if you're doing high volume, like even if there's rest days in there, but you're doing like big rides, like big zone 2 rides, you're still going to be fatigued, like for sure. And so those quality of those workouts just aren't going to be as top notch.
Yeah. And here's another cool thing about shorter racing that I don't think, I mean, you can kind of do this with longer racing, but it's riskier and you can't do it as often. You can very easily simulate these shorter races in your training, and like you
Oh
should.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so a 25-mile gravel race here, let's say it's, you know, hour and 15 minutes to an hour and 30 minutes. And there's going to be a lot of, you know, repeated efforts, and there's going to be attacks you're responding to and time and time. Like you can curate workouts to be very close to specific to what the race demands are going to be. And that's exactly what I would do. You know, I would,
Hmm.
as you get closer to the race season, you know, I'd almost, you know, start the race season more or less a month out, where you're actually doing one of these simulation rides each week.
Yeah.
And that's kind of your preparation, final preparation. Uh, that probably looks something like long tempo over unders for this. You know, like I don't know what the dynamics are, and I don't know what the terrain is like up there, but I'm guessing just, you know, 25 miles gravel, probably averaging 20 miles an hour or something like that, maybe plus. You know, so you're talking about, you know, probably in a pace line, probably, you know, there's probably surges, there's going to be attacks, and really just staying on the gas for most of it. So, you know, I'd probably do some like 20 to 30 minute tempo over under sessions where you're kind of just like, you're kind of like, you know, getting in that steady state for 5 minutes and then surging for a minute, and then getting back into steady state for 5 minutes and then surging for another minute. And kind of doing those, stacking those on until you hit the, you know, 60 minutes that you're looking for, or maybe even extend that out to the full 90 minutes of the race. You know, but that's probably what I would, as far as what I would think that you know, should focus on. I'd probably mix something like that in.
And try to shoot for the high end of tempo, I would say. You know, a lot of
Yeah.
times when I'm doing tempo, I'm shooting for like middle of tempo because I want to do as much of it as I can. But if you're thinking the race is shorter, I would shoot for the what they would call that sweet spot, where it's like kind of hovering between tempo and threshold, because that's going to be a lot of more of what the race is going to demand.
Yep.
I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm glad we started talking about this, because we'd be doing you a disservice if we didn't talk about the type of intensity that you need. Because when you say hit, my mind just automatically goes to like Tabata style things, or like 30-30s. Yeah. But if all you were doing on your intensity days were those like sprint efforts, because they are really fun, I'll give you that. Yeah. And then you were just doing endurance the rest of the week. I like the track analogy, because imagine, like I said, this is more of like a 1,500 meter track event. Imagine if they were just doing long runs and then 100-meter sprints. Come race day, you wouldn't have anything.
No way.
Same thing with this event, this 25-mile race. Like if, you're at a chill start and then they just absolutely hammer for 30 minutes, but all you're used to is 30-30s. It's not, you need like that sweet spot, that tempo, building time in that zone.
Yep.
On your intensity days. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for reference, because we've talked about the intensity side of things, but talking about the zone 2 side of things, like we're not saying don't do zone 2. I'm just saying don't do crazy long zone 2. Like I know really good crit racers, their longest rides that they do are 3 hours. They don't ride longer than 3 hours. And it's like, to me, that's mind boggling. I'm like, no way, I got to work harder than that. Like I need to put in more time if I want to get faster. But for a race like a crit where it's like 60 to 90 minutes, very similar to what he's describing, it's I know really good crit racers that 3 hours is their max length of a ride. And I think that's plenty. I think that's good.
Well, or to look at it, a little bit more holistically, like I also know crit racers that race at the, Pro 1 level on 12 hours a week. It's like, and a lot of times carrying full-time jobs and stuff too. It's like, because that's, you can get by with that. You can get by with the 1 or 2 3-hour rides a week and a lot of 90-minute sessions and some hit sessions, and
all these like,
and that works.
Full-time dudes trying to race Unbound 200. I'm like, you guys why wouldn't you just race a crit or something? That seems so much more feasible. Like, but the draw, I get the draw and all that, but the challenge.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, the main thing is like, we're always trying to target specificity as you get closer to your event. The more you can, more specific your training can get, the more prepared you're going to be. And that goes for anything shorter duration too. So like if we're talking short track racing or cyclocross racing, that's why it's something like cyclocross hot laps practices, where you're going out there with a group of people and doing, 5 or 6 hot laps, with a group, is great training, because you're simulating that race effort. Same thing with like a short track. Like if you can get out there with a group and do like some simulated short track races, the shorter the duration is, like the more specific you can actually get with your training, because you can actually fit the entire duration of the race effort into a training session. You can't always do that with those longer races, and that's where I think it gets more complicated. But yeah, the more specificity you can work into your training as you get closer to the event, that the more prepared you're going to be.
Yeah, I was on the phone with somebody this weekend who's training for the Dam, a 200-mile gravel race, and he's never really done a gravel race before. And one of the questions he asked me was like, how can I prepare for this race? And I could give him 1,000 different workouts, but the first thing I told him to do was like, you should probably do a couple races before that race. Like if that's your A race and you've never done a race before, for sure, especially for him, but for even somebody, who's like got this series that they're trying to target, like sprinkling in some B events to do like some tune-ups. And that's really how you want to talk about how to get the most specific. Well, do some tune-up races, and that's going to get pretty specific.
For sure. Yeah, I'm a big fan of tune-up races. I'll get a lot of athletes that they'll come to me and they'll, seek permission about whether or not they can, throw these, events in before their big event, right?
Yeah.
And I'm always like, we are preparing you to be a bike racer. So the more bike racing we can do, like the more fun you can have, I think the better. Now there's there's a certain time and a place where it's like, hey, this is, getting to be too much. It's going to actually influence your big race day, and that's usually coming, pretty close to race day. Like, we're not going to do a big race the week before the big race.
Yeah.
Or maybe, you're stacking too much travel, things like that. But for the most part, like, especially local racing, like the more you can just throw in some racing. I don't even care necessarily if it's the same type of racing or the same duration racing. I just think the more exposure you can put yourself in to that, race scenario, the better, the more comfortable you're going to feel on that big race day.
Yeah.
So yeah. Cool. Let's move on to Ronald's question. Ronald says, I am training for a 131-mile gravel race with 10,000 feet of climbing. My question is, should I cross-train on other equipment during the wintertime? I have a rowing machine, treadmill, and an elliptical machine. If so, which of these equipment should I use? Thanks. I enjoy your podcast, Ronald.
Yes.
Rowing machine,
All of it.
treadmill, elliptical. Okay.
Let's hear your take, Caitlin, on the frequency of which you would recommend Ronald, utilizing some of these other modalities.
Oh, man, these questions are so hard because as a coach, our job is to come alongside, not just give you a plan and say, this is what's going to get you to where you want to be, and this is going to be the best way to do it. It's, what do you enjoy? Do you hate the elliptical? No, don't friggin' get on the elliptical then. Like, do you love the row machine? Great. Like, do you hate the trainer? Well, you only have so much mental capacity to push through a trainer session that you don't want to do. So, like, if you do that one time, there's some benefit there. But if you're doing that day after day after day, it's a fast way to get burnout. So if you need to mix in an intensity session on the row machine, and that's going to bring you more joy and create a more sustainable plan, then yeah. And maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's 2 days a week, maybe it's 3. It really just depends. And it goes back to what weaknesses do we need to train to get you ready for this 130-mile event? So that's really dependent. Like, we need to have that information to say, okay, you can have this many days of cross training and need to focus this much on the bike.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it depends what, where in the season does this 131-mile gravel race fall? How much do you need to actually build your base fitness during the base season? The traditional base season being the winter months, which is always unfortunate. But if this gravel race doesn't happen until September, it's probably not that big of a deal. Like, we can just kind of get by through winter, and then you've got time come March to start really building your aerobic base fitness. Yeah. But if the race is in May, or even earlier, then yeah, for sure, we've got to get as much fitness in as we can over these winter months and this traditional base season, and utilizing as many of these modalities as you can just to be able to stack that volume in is going to be super beneficial. Like, looking at these 3 different equipment choices that he offers, so the rowing machine, the treadmill, and the elliptical machine, I think it kind of depends on your proficiency. Rowing can be really good, but it depends on how mechanically efficient you are at rowing, because you've got to be able to still get your heart rate up high enough to where it's quality training. We don't want your heart rate to be 105 beats per minute for an hour. That's probably not going to be a super efficient use of your time. Rowing can also be, if you're not used to rowing, it can be like muscularly pretty fatiguing, to where like you could be sore for a day or two if you extend beyond what your comfortable range is for duration. So it kind of depends on how proficient you are with rowing, but rowing can be a great choice. People that are very efficient in used to rowing, you can get a 90-minute rowing session and that can be really high quality. And I think it can translate pretty well. Treadmill, obviously, that's I think a great one. And the treadmill can even be, it doesn't have to necessarily be running. You can also do something like put the incline up pretty high and do more like fast paced walking or slow jogging uphill, to where it's not as much like wear and tear on the body, where you're not like pounding the treadmill at a high pace, but you can still get your heart rate up, relatively high by doing that.
Do people ruck on treadmills? Can you
Oh
ruck
yeah.
on a treadmill?
Yeah,
I know
definitely.
rucking's like
Actually,
a big thing now, and that would be basically like strapping a big weight to your chest and then turning the incline up and just
yeah, I
hiking.
mean, I don't know if I would like, use like tie down straps to strap a plate to my chest,
Yeah,
but
no, that's not what.
but
Yeah.
if you've got some kind of like rucking pack or even just a weighted backpack is fine. That can be another option too, just to like increase the resistance, as you're also increasing the incline. If you're just wearing a weighted pack and the treadmill is flat, like, you know, you're probably not going to notice, like you're not going to just walk with a weighted pack on a flat terrain and get your heart rate high enough. That's not going to do it. You've got to have some incline. But it's super common actually in the like backcountry skiing world to see that, or even just like people that are training for doing like through hikes where they can't just go out to the trails and hike for 2 hours a day, but maybe they can throw some weight on their back and hop on the treadmill or the stair climber. So that's an option too. If you don't want to do the running portion of the treadmill and you want to, reduce the impact a little bit, or maybe even just like increase some other stimulus and recruit some like core strength, then yeah, throwing like a weighted pack on, inclining the treadmill, that's a great option. The elliptical, like I don't personally have a ton of experience using elliptical machines to know how easily you can get your heart rate up. I've had two athletes in the past that have utilized the elliptical machine pretty well to be able to do like some base aerobic conditioning. And we've been able to at least hit like the very low end of zone 2, which I think is fine. Like as long as you're kind of getting your heart rate up to where you're hitting zone 2, I think the elliptical is fine. But it depends, like from my understanding, like you've got to push yourself pretty decent on the elliptical to get to that point, just because it is like really like mechanically efficient machine.
I will say if you're going months on the trainer, use the treadmill because the elliptical is also no impact.
Sure.
So for the sake of getting some sort of impact activity, resistance training does have an effect on bone density, but cycling is very low, no impact sport.
Yeah.
Cycling's worse for your bone mineral density.
Yeah. I don't know about mountain biking though. If the jarring actually,
sure.
I'm sure it's better than just the trainer or road cycling, but if you're open to cross training, use the opportunity to get some impact activity.
I was going to mention that. Yeah, the bone mineral density is a big thing, even for just overall. Like I think there's a lot of other health benefits to having your bone mineral density at a healthy level besides just performance.
If you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah, running's really good for it, and strength training is really good for it. Like even just going to the gym is actually better for bone mineral density than running, which is kind of, to me, I was kind of counterintuitive. But running's really good for it too. The way that I use cross training like this, like and mostly what I do is running on the treadmill or outside. I use it as supplemental training to my zone 2. So all of the running that I do is I went through a phase of doing some track workouts and stuff, but like years ago. But now I just use running or these other modes as other ways to bulk up my zone 2. So like basically like my goal now is like how many hours can I get into my weekly volume? And so if I can squeeze in, and I do this right now I'm doing it where I'm doing 2 1-hour runs throughout the week. That's 2 more hours of zone 2 training that is also increasing, like, and I almost think of that as a benefit. Like if I was just going to do, and I've done this a few times where like I could add an hour on to my long endurance ride, or I could wake up early and do a 1-hour run. And I think it would be more beneficial for me to do a 1-hour run and then cut an hour off of my ride if that's the option, because I think there's a couple benefits that running's going to provide that cycling doesn't necessarily do. But at the end of the day, I still end up with the same amount of zone 2 training. That's how I see it. And that's specific to running, and I enjoy running. We have a rowing machine, but I can't do it longer for than like 15 minutes because it kills my butt for some reason. I probably just need to
It's
get a
harder.
different, like I just need to get a different like cushion or whatever. But my sit bones are like so bony that like my butt hurts after like 10 minutes.
So you're not talking because of the
Not because of the muscles.
glute
It's literally
recruitment.
because of my
Okay.
sit bones are so like
Oh,
pointy that it
you gotta
hurts
wear
my butt.
you gotta wear your bibs on the
I might,
on the
yeah.
rower.
Maybe that's what I got to do. Yeah, some extra cushion. But
Yeah. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just like over the years become more and more of a fan of integrating some cross training for pretty much all athletes.
Yeah.
You know,
I think the two other
yeah.
Go ahead. The two things I was going to mention that make it way more practical for me is like schedule and weather. So like if my schedule's crammed, but I can get in, and I can only get in a 3-hour ride, but I was really hoping to get more than that for my endurance ride. Well, then I'll wake up early and I'll do a run in the morning because I can get in. A 1-hour run is really efficient. Like I can wake up, do that before the kids wake up, and then do my 3-hour ride later or something. Like on Sundays, almost every Sunday, that's what I do. Before church, an hour run, church, endurance ride. Like almost to a T. Like that works really well for the schedule portion of it. And then for weather, if the weather's really crappy and you don't want to ride outside for like as long as what your coach put on the plan, I would say try to do it fit, like try to come up with some other plan where you still end up with close to the same amount of volume, but maybe like half of it's inside doing something else and half of it's outside, so that you're not like just miserable for the whole time. Like I think those are two very practical applications for something like this.
Yep, agreed. All right,
I wouldn't just like do it out of the blue though. Like I had a friend who like was like, "Oh, cross training's awesome," and then like the next day he went for like a hour and a half long. He just went rollerblading for like an hour, and he told me that it ruined his whole week of training on the bike because he was so sore from the rollerblading session that he did. And I was like, "Yeah, that's probably good, but you probably should have started out a little lighter and built up to that." You just went gung ho on the cross training.
And I think there are exceptions too. You know, again, we're really trying to find a way to have quality training, you know, mixed in. So, you know, quality cross training. And if you're doing a modality that's keeping your heart rate well below zone 2, then that's not quite getting you there. And I don't know, I haven't rollerbladed in a long time.
I think it was actually more from like muscle soreness, like
yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
I think it was good for his heart rate, but his muscles weren't used to that movement, and he was like sore.
I imagine you have to rollerblade again pretty hard, pretty fast for it to get into zone 2 training.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever actually just gone out and rollerbladed. I like
can't
either
say I have either.
Like playing like roller hockey or something, or not.
It does make me curious. Like, how much do really good rollerblades cost, and where would you do it?
I know people that roller ski. You know, that's like a replacement for cross country skiing. So they're like really long rollerblades where they look almost like skis. And you can do that very, very well. You know, people, you know, you can do that. You can do intervals on those, you know, just like you're doing cross country skiing.
Dang, maybe that's my next adventure is rollerblading.
All right. Let's see this. Let's take this last question here from Colin quick. So Colin's talking about, again, utilizing cross training. So I think this kind of flows in, but you know, it's a little bit different here. So, hey, love the podcast. I have question in regards to building FTP in the off season while doing other sports, in this case cross country skiing. I love taking advantage of winter here in New England and try to get out to the Nordic ski area around 1 to 3 hours per week. I'm training for a couple small local races this winter, so I can make the efforts pretty strenuous, putting them in the threshold category in cycling terms. So I think Colin's talking about training for small XC races in the wintertime here. My main question is, if I only have 5 to 6 hours a week extra for cycling on the trainer, what types of workouts should I be focusing on to ideally build, but at the very least maintain my FTP? Should it be mostly zone 2 since the skiing is already pretty full gas? I know you'll say, dude, just find more time, more hours on the bike. That was in quotes. I'll save you.
Who would say that?
I'll save you all the naughty word and moaning excuses, complaining and moaning excuses about life balance and stuff. But I don't see myself finding more time than that for the bike until mid-March. As far as my FTP goes, it went from a pretty stagnant 240 to 265 over a couple months this past fall from just 4 hours per week, which essentially looked like getting my butt smashed in for a couple hours on a local midweek group ride, then a couple chill hours the rest of the week. I want to take cycling a little more seriously this upcoming season and don't want to waste this new bump in fitness, so I'd love your thoughts. Cheers, Colin. So this one here I thought was a little bit different because Colin is actually like integrating cross training in with like some intention, right? So Colin, not only does he just enjoy cross country skiing, but he's also training for some cross country skiing races. So like cross country skiing is just a natural part of Colin's already training routine. So, this one's kind of like, how can I, utilize my time on the bike appropriately while amidst this cross training phase of the season, to try and, in his case, just trying to maintain FTP. So yeah, what are your thoughts here?
I've never skied, so I can't
so
speak
Colin's
directly, but
yeah, so Colin's,
I do have
Colin's going to
thoughts.
do his skiing thing, right? We're not going to take anything or contribute anything to what Colin's already doing on the skis, because
you think that when he says the local races, you think he's talking about ski
races.
Ski races, correct?
Okay.
Yep.
In the same sense, he says, "So I'm making my ski efforts around threshold."
Yeah. So, and he wants to do these skiing races, and that's why he's making these skiing efforts a little more strenuous. Got it.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
I think
that makes it way different. Yeah.
I think one of the most important things to note here is even though you're doing threshold work skiing, it takes a certain amount of muscular strength to be able to push the watts to increase your FTP. And so if you're not pushing the power, then you're not going to have that. So
So are you trying to say that you're like, it's not going to translate directly between the two?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I could agree with that.
It's like, it's not the same thing, but I'm going to throw this out, so take it however you want. It's like me living at altitude and having an advantage when I go down to sea level, but I'm not, even though I have more of an aerobic capacity, my legs aren't used to pushing that extra power that I have access to.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, and that's actually very common. People come down to altitude or come down from altitude and they experience like, muscle cramps or just muscle fatigue onset because they're not used to pushing higher watts. Even though they can aerobically, they can do more power, especially high end power. Their muscles are not used to that demand.
So if you're not, my suggestion would be make sure you're strength training.
Do what?
Make sure you're strength training.
Okay.
In addition to like his hard skiing workouts, you're saying.
Yeah.
I would say when you do a hard ski, also hit the gym pretty good that day.
And that's
just for the sake of
you're saying, you're saying that's going to help you to carry more of that into your cycling fitness.
I think
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about as far as, Colin's doing, let's assume Colin's doing 2 hard XC ski workouts a week. Would you just strip out all intensity on the bike then and just have Colin focus on zone 2 training on the bike?
Depends. I think it would say it depends on how important the ski races are to him. That's where my brain goes, is like, what's more important, these ski races that you're doing in the off season, or your cycling races that are coming up in your season? Because if these are just off season training races, then I would almost say do your intensity on the bike and and just do enough skiing to where you have enough of that specific what is it, skill or whatever, to be able to
Yeah.
hop in those races and do them. That's what I would say, but I don't know how important these ski races are to him.
I mean, it is hard, and this is why a lot of coaches will recommend not racing in the off season, for this reason, because we've all been to races where we're not very fit or proficient at what we're doing, and it's just not as much fun when you can't go as fast as you know you should. So it can be tough because skiing is a lot different, similar to running, I would say, in a sense, is a lot different than cycling, where like on the bike you can kind of just you can always just pedal harder. Like you can pedal harder to a point where you just can't go harder because like you're limited by what your cardiovascular system can do. But mechanically, like it's not hard to just pedal harder. Whereas like with some of these other modalities, especially cross country skiing, and I think it's similar with running, there's a certain level of like muscular efficiency that you have to build and the technique of doing so.
Yeah.
That you can really only get from doing high intensity efforts. And it changes. Like when you're doing easy zone 2 training on cross country skis, and then you're doing like fast, hard, high intensity VO2 max work, the mechanics are maybe the base mechanics are the same, but the actual like output of the mechanics is very different, and the strain that it has on your muscles is very different. So I get it. If you want to have fun at these races and not feel like you're on the back foot the whole time, or like, half dying inside because you're just not used to it, maybe splitting your time with one high intensity session on skis per week and one high intensity session on the bike is like the
That's
best
what I was
happy
going to
medium.
say.
Yeah,
Because he
I
says he's only doing 1 to 3 hours of skiing. That's not a lot. That sounds like 2 sessions. You can do
Yeah.
one intensity session ski, so say an hour ski workout, and then a 2-hour zone 2 ski later in the week for cross training.
Yep.
And then
Yeah.
your other intensity session is on the bike.
Yeah, that's a good balance.
Yeah. And I would say, for this time of year, it kind of depends on Colin doesn't mention a whole lot about what he's doing as far as on the bike racing. So, I don't know exactly what Colin's trying to prepare for in the summer, or fall season, or even the spring gravel season. Gravel or mountain biking can start in the spring, but I would for the most part just try to complement whatever you're doing on the skis. I would kind of do a similar session on the bike. You're probably sounds like you're doing threshold work on the skis. It's a good time of year to be doing some threshold work on the bike. So that could be pretty basic. It doesn't have to be anything complicated, 3x10, something like that. But trying to just hit those threshold intervals. I think, now is a good time of year to do that. And I think what you're going to find, Colin, sounds like you're fairly newer to riding, or at least like, structured, serious riding. I think you're going to find it's a lot easier to maintain fitness than you probably think. That 25 watt increase that you gained last year, I think you'll find like that's going to come back pretty quick if it's not already still there. And just maintaining that's going to be pretty easy. Increasing that by, 10, 20%, that's more challenging, obviously. But, right now your concern is that you're going to lose that fitness that you've, precious fitness you've built over the last 6 months. And I don't think that's going to be the case. I think, what you've got going here, especially if you mix it up with one session on the bike, one session on the skis, I think you're going to find that you can maintain that pretty easily. And it's, and hopefully you're going to just continue to build that fitness.
Yeah, I wanted to, I think one of the main things that stood out to me in the question was his focus on FTP. And I was going to caution him in regard to that. He says, at the very least, he wants to maintain his FTP, because he did make a 25 watt increase last year. And so he's thinking, oh, I don't want to go back to 240. And I would caution him to getting too focused on those numbers. Sometimes the best thing to do to your FTP is to let it drop so that later it can get even higher. So like,
for sure,
if you're looking at getting your FTP over 265, I wouldn't worry too much about it dropping right now if you're just trying to build a big aerobic base, because then the focus right now shouldn't necessarily even be on FTP and raising that. I would say the focus right now should be on maybe volume and endurance and all of that, and some cross training and all that. And then later in a couple months, like in March, when he's got more time to take cycling a little more serious, that's when we would start to focus more on like, okay, let's raise this FTP. But I think trying to maintain your FTP throughout the off season is a mistake.
Yeah, agreed. Especially, like you said, if you're if you're truly trying to periodize it in a strategic way to where there's a point in the season where you're actually reaching that peak fitness, you've got to let it also drop down and reach a valley at some point. Like I remember over the course of probably 4 or 5 years when my FTP was like year after year going up and going up and going up, it'd be like I'd hit like 330 as like a peak, and then I'd let it drop back down to like 300 in the off season. And then like the next season I'd hit like 345, and then it would come down to 315, and then 360, and then it came down to like 320 in the off season, and then like 365, and it's like you have to let it just it's just going to naturally come down, and that's okay. What I meant to say is like you'd be surprised how easily that comes back, even if it does drop. Like for me, it would take like 2 months, and I'd go from the 315 off season FTP back to like 350. Like it doesn't take a whole lot for it to come back. But I totally agree. I think you have to at some point let it come down, and that's a huge mistake that a lot of people that are uncoached make, is they're trying to just like grasp onto that, never let go of that FTP, because like there's like self-worth placed in that, what that number is. So they're like, I can't let that number decrease at all, or else somehow I'm devaluing myself. And I think that's a huge mistake.
Here, let me give you some advice. Just don't test your FTP at all through the base season. Just don't do it. Just drop it just drop it in training peaks to a reasonable number. This is literally what I do. I don't ever do FTP tests in the off season. I'll take my 2 weeks off and I'll drop it like down to what I think it is. That's quite a bit lower than what it was when I was racing. And then a couple months into training, when I'm starting to get into like the end of my base season, that's when I'll test my FTP. But very rarely do I test it throughout the off season. I don't even really care about it. But
for sure.
And for him, if he went from 240 to 265 off of 4 hours a week, I'm not worried at all that he's going to get back to that in a flash. Like if he's already saying he's doing 6 hours on the bike now, he'll get back to that. Like I'm not, it's like a non-concern. Like I think no problem. He's going to be over 265 by the midway point this season. Like I think.
Yeah, like something that I used to do for myself and I'll still do for some of my like higher level athletes is when we're kind of getting back into the first phase of base training after the off season, I'll actually have them turn off power when they're doing their intervals, because we're mostly doing tempo work, and like just focus on either RPE or heart rate, because then there's no like number you're trying to hit. There's no like psychological component of like, oh, I used to be doing this at 300 watts and now I'm only doing it at 250, where like you start to like get that negativity in your head. It's like it doesn't matter, like we're just trying to do the work and spend time in the zone. So like I'd rather see you just go out there and just be focused on doing the best you can with what you've got, and like let me worry about the numbers. Like that's my job, is behind the scenes to like make sure that number is coming up over time. But like you don't need to be worrying about that. Like it's going to, and all you need to be focused on is like what's in front of you right now. So that's a trick that I found to work well for me and some of my athletes, is just don't worry about the power for right now. Even like we're not doing work that specifically you need to be targeting power numbers anyways.
To get somewhere you've never been before, you got to do something you've never done before. And I feel like,
or in other words,
why don't
train insane or remain the same?
Well, you'll probably actually think this is insane, but if you haven't taken time off the bike, take time off the bike. If you like XC skiing enough that you're going to do some races, like go all into the races. Just take a month. Take a friggin' month off the bike and like cross train, ski, run, do all the things. And you never know, by doing that and by going all in, that fitness could really support your bike endeavors once you start riding again. And you're going to go into riding with that much more motivation because you've put the bike away for
For
4 to
sure.
6
Love
weeks.
Love that.
Yeah.
So,
One of my athletes texted me just last week and she's like, "Oh, the snow's good." And I was like, "Don't ride today. Go do your skiing." Like,
Yeah.
if you literally, if that's what you want to do, then go do that. Like, it's going to pay dividends down the road, I think. Yeah.
unless
Yeah.
you or your wife has said, look, you have 1 more year to ride your bike and do these races, then you might want to reconsider.
Yeah.
But if not, like, just try something new. Play. Have fun.
Get some rollerblades, dude.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go on
It's
eBay right
so-
now and find some
It's
rollerblades.
so funny you said that because Blaine spent a week in Tucson and he was like, you would not believe the amount of people I saw rollerblading on the path. I was like,
Nice.
He was like,
Blaine.
it looked really fun.
Bladen. Yep.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Cool. Yeah, so good luck with it, Colin. That's it. That's all we got for this week.
Cool.
Sweet.
All right.
See you next time.
Sounds
See
good.
ya.
See ya.